There's a joy in that as well. Just understanding that the basis of all the work is writing. One, and we don't write for our audience. There's no one standing over us clapping when we write and we put that comma there. It's a very personal thing. But also, so is reading and consuming the tools, consuming the tools to then be able to write. So I'd love for poets to just be able to reference a bit more literature as opposed to a performance or a slam or a video, because I think there's some worth there. And it also just ensures longevity, like the idea that you're able to back up what you are doing with what you have read and how you sort of critically think around text and poetry and how it plays on the page.
Hi everyone, my name is Emmah Mabye, your host of Yes, the Amazing Buo. Today we have with us a man who, again, needs no introduction, but I will let you know something about him. He is also the people's poet, the people's person. Oh my gosh, like I've been meaning to sit with this man. So, quick intro. Quaz is a poet and the Arts Academy coordinator for the University of Johannesburg's Arts and Culture Department. He is the editor of poetrypotion.com and the host of the Poetry Potion podcast. This man has traveled, okay? He has performed his poetry at various international festivals in countries such as Swaziland, Zimbabwe, Mauritius, Botswana, and Brazil. Everybody, please put your hands together. Virtual applause for Quaz Roodt.
That everybody included me, no? I don't want to be vain and clapping for myself.
I think you have actually earned that.
Yeah?
Hey, it's all right. How about you?
I'm well, man. Thank you for having me. I'm really good. How are you?
Thank you. I'm too excited to be having you here. Thank you so much. Before we dive deep into things, why this poem that you just did?
For me, poetry in particular should start conversations. And I think the interesting thing with Afrikaans in particular is that it always starts a conversation. And I'm not really concerned with where the conversation goes as long as it starts that conversation. But I also think, one, it is a beautiful language to write in, and two, it is my home language. And writing about family in particular just feels right to write it in the language that I communicated with them with. So it's various different things. The reason I perform Afrikaans in general is to have people also go, wait, what? And then go back and sort of start interrogating the histories of the language that aren't as in your face as, sort of mainstream histories and those type of conversations. So for me, it's always fun to have a poem fall out of my mouth that doesn't seem like it should be coming out of my mouth, and then have people respond later on, like why, how, what did it mean? I think that's the work that poetry is supposed to do. It's supposed to have people ask questions afterwards, or at least interrogate themselves in their positioning with the subject matter, which in this case was poetry as the vehicle, but the subject matter was me talking about my family. So it's just easier to do it that way.
For those who don't understand Afrikaans, can you just expand on what the poems are actually saying?
The first poem, Onbekende Gesigte, speaks of really just self-interrogation, looking at yourself in the mirror and then having these different versions of you looking back and telling you, yo, choose one and ruk yourself reg, which means get yourself in order, And then the second poem sort of responds to that, just my relationship with, it's titled Sewe Gedagte. So it's really my relationship with my grandmother, my father, my sister, and exploring sort of what those look like and what they looked like and how I sort of envision where they could be, tomorrow, or the day after that. So those poems in general is really just also me taking a moment to reflect on the relationships that I have with these people that have contributed to me as a person, but also just me as a poet in general, because each and every one of the people that I mentioned there are also moments that inspired poems that pushed me towards this direction that I've ultimately found myself walking in.
Do you find that these people that you speak of also support the work that you do?
Oh yeah, for sure. Look, my sister passed away, my grand passed away, so I'm hoping they're up in heaven supporting. It would be horrible if they're like up there like, you suck! But I'm really blessed because I come from Potchefstroom, right? And my parents, my mother worked in retail and my dad was a carpenter, and So when they sent me to university, it was go and make something of your life and earn a life and get a degree and sort of get a career going. And the minute I told them, look, man, I'm doing this theater thing and this arts thing, they supported me. You know, they were like, okay, go ahead. What do you need?
What?
Cool. You know, and then I mean, up until I was about 23, 24, they were still paying my rent and I was out of university. And like, they were just like, whatever you need to do to get it going, you know?
Nice.
And in hindsight now, like, I'm like, oh my God, I really put my parents through like the worst, because on their salaries, they still managed to maintain me and say, go ahead and do this thing. And thank God, you know, I'm always so grateful as well that things worked out, that I managed to find an angle and a spot and just a path that works for me, where I can, you know, have a creative output, but also be able to look after myself and my family, you know. So I think now that I'm doing a little better in the space that I'm in, they definitely supporting me. They're like, yes, play that artist.
Well, bless your family. Listen, write as many poems about them as possible.
You know?
Bless your family. On the aspect of language, you know, we attend a lot of international festivals.
Right.
And you've got poets who come in and do their language, and vice versa, right? We go out there and we do our language. Do you feel that you reciting in your own language takes away from your performance in any way, or you connecting with the audience in some way or the other?
I think on some level, there's something that you have to sort of let go and allow the poem to die in that way. Like in terms of the sounds that you're hearing me say, you might not understand it.
Yeah.
But poems convey so much more than just the language. Sometimes it's a feeling, sometimes it's an emotion. I was invited to Brazil, and when I got there, I was like, I'm doing Afrikaans poems. I don't care. Because you guys are doing Portuguese and you don't care about me, right? But I'm sitting there and appreciating the Portuguese, and I can imagine that they themselves would be able to find those pockets in the language and be like, oh, we hear you, we understand you, you know? Which is also why it's also so important for me when I'm doing sort of curatorial work. I encourage people, do it in your language. Doesn't matter if I don't understand. Like the poem communicates on levels beyond language sometimes. And I think it's important for us to also trust that the work does that type of work, you know, as opposed to just expecting everyone to immediately understand and immediately respond to the poem. Because the work we do doesn't really work that way either. Poetry has a latent effect. It's like I drop the seed and then I leave. And 10 years later, I come back and you're like, oh my God, 10 years ago, you blew my mind and it changed my mind and it changed the way I think and it changed the way I interact with people, or not. But the work that we do doesn't necessarily change the world immediately. And sometimes I think once you sort of relieve the poetry of that responsibility, then it's also easier for you to walk into a space where you don't expect people to go, yeah, that was an amazing poem. Where you just like, I allowed my soul to speak here. And whether it's one or two people that get it, that's fine, because that's also the a side of the work that we are doing. But I mean, I've been doing this for so long. At some point, you know, you go through the motions where it's like applause is the ultimate. And then after that, it's like publishing is the ultimate. And then after that, it's like, I just want to stand on stage and read a poem, and that becomes the ultimate. So I think it's also just stages that you go through where you start realizing what type of work the poetry does. And then taking a lot less, or rather putting a lot less responsibility on the work to immediately change the world, or immediately have people respond in sort of a visceral way, and allow it to have that latent effect. Let it soak, let it permeate, and then later on, you yourself as the writer come back, or you yourself as the audience member who consumed it, come back to it and hopefully find yourself a different or better person.
But when you started off on your poetry journey, you didn't start with Afrikaans though?
Oh, no. It was English all the way. When I started, it was all ego driven. Everyone lied to you. My sister passed away, right? And people are sitting at the funeral and I'm asked to speak. And I go on and I, you know, just do the speech that I wrote.
Yeah.
And but people are responding, they're laughing and they're clapping. And this little ego inside of me is like, I like this. Rest in peace, sister, but this is my moment, you know?
Yeah.
Sort of finding that thing, like, I really enjoyed what saying words and then having people respond. But that was all written in English, because my first interaction with poetry was sort of English, what we were taught in English class. And then, you know, you have sort of the Afrikaans rijmpies here and there, but you don't consider that poetry until you're much older as well, because you think it's so rudimentary and it's so la, la, la. La la la, where you realize, but that is actually technique as well that you employ later on when you start writing poetry, and like once you start fleshing out those very rhythms and techniques that you ignored in the nursery rhymes are the foundations of some of the greatest poems that have ever been written as well. So I didn't start in English, no. But I found Afrikaans because I found myself in Joburg speaking English to English-speaking poets, and me having this arsenal, this language with the ghs and the kr and the kh. And I'm like, how could you not want to exploit something that sounds so beautiful and crispy, but then also exploit the idea of where it's placed in people's minds and heads, and then start that conversation, you know? Which sort of happened by default, but I'm really enjoying it as well. Where it's like, oh, you want to talk about Afrikaans? Let's go.
Yes.
Do you know Chocha is from the old Kwekwe word? Do you know that Eina is not even, you know, do you know that the word Dacha comes from? And it's like, suddenly you start playing with more than just etymology. It's like you start playing with culture, and you start realizing what also erasure does to you, right? So you start using words in everyday conversation, and you don't realize this is a word that was used here even before the first peoples from anywhere else in the world came here. People in the Northern Cape and wherever else were using Ina when they stubbed their toe. And now it's part of the sort of Afrikaans lexicon, and it's just accepted, you know. And there's a million other words that sort of found their way into what the language sounds like. But it's interesting because there's those type of conversations you can have. And then in South Africa, you know, the perception is that, you know, the history of Afrikaans starts in the 70s with, you know, Bantu education, and we don't want to interrogate what it looked like before, you know, and also what it looks like now afterwards, when there's a big group of sort of Black Afrikaans speaking people saying, but hold up, where you're placing it in history isn't necessarily where it exists, and we need to, you know, unpack that and repackage that so that people know that this comes from us. You know, as much as it is also influenced by the outside world, but this was a language that was born out of necessity. It's a language that was born out of you know, the need to find to sort of break the disconnect between whether colonizer and native or whatever else. But that's what it was. It was how do we at least manage this violence or this silent violence in between us by replacing a common dialect. You know, there's that conversation that you can have. Then there's Dikatosobi Stoof, which is also fun, you know, which is, you know, sort of culturally how Afrikaans is perceived, and it's sort of like comic relief and that type of thing. There's that conversation as well, you know, and I think this goes for any language really in South Africa. If you start interrogating it and start speaking about where it comes from and what it is that we are saying with the words that we are using. But for me, Afrikaans in particular is a very interesting one because it allows for much more than just what you experience in the moment through the poem. It also asks you to be a little aware of the history, the multiple histories and the complex histories of the language. And that always, you know, that door is always flung open when I find myself standing in front of an audience that isn't predominantly Afrikaans. And then I'm like, okay, goeiemôre almal, vandag gaan ons poësie doen en ek gaan oor jou hart praat. And I was like, why are you doing this? You know, and I think that's the beauty of also just using art to sort of explore these beautiful nuances and pockets of humanity, you know. It's easier to have conversations that way than coming up to you and saying, hey, Emmah, come, let's talk about Afrikaans and its placement in your head. Like you can really find beautiful entry points to have difficult conversations, and Afrikaans just being one of them, for me, with the work that I'm doing at least.
What does poetry mean to Quaz Roodt?
I feel like I should know this answer because I've been writing poetry and working in these spaces for so long.
How long has it been, actually?
I wrote my first poem when I was 13. I've been writing every week, every day since then.
Every week, every day?
Not every day. Not every day. You know what, I'm lying.
Right.
I've at least attempted to be an active writer since I started writing. Wow. And I am 38 now, so you guys can do the maths. But I mean, I don't think there's ever a point where you arrive and you say you are a poet, you know, or like you arrive and you say, I've now written the final form of this perfect poem. I think it's constantly working towards something else. I used to love writing poems about space and the outside and God and these big ideas. And now I'm more concerned with what's inside me and how that's being projected out. But I think those are also the type of things that you find as you go through these phases. You're reading a lot, you're going to performances, you're watching a slam, you're watching a theater piece, you're checking out a gallery installation or whatever else. And that sort of hammers your voice into shape, you know? So I've been doing it for a very long time, and it meant a lot of different things to me over time.
So 25 years of being on this journey,
Yeah.
after doing the maths, what has kept you in poetry for so long, or the arts actually?
I mean, I think it's sort of diversifying. So using poetry as the foundation of all the work that I'm doing. You know, I genuinely love reading poetry. I love writing poetry.
Yeah.
These days, I find myself loving reading it a lot more. You know, sitting down and just diving into like different voices and that type of what the world looks like through someone else's eyes, and experiencing the world like that in prose and in these beautiful sort of order of words. So that's one thing that I've always loved. But the idea of also everything that we do starts with something written down, you know? And if you are a poet, you probably have like a skill set that allows you to write that something that needs to be written down very beautifully, you know? So exploiting that. The idea of your poem being turned into something else, exploiting that. So it's never only been poetry. It's how can my poetry live in a theater space? How can I turn my poetry into a ballet piece?
Yeah.
How can I turn my poetry into some virtual reality type thing? It's always looking for the next way for it to exist in, or the next form that it might exist in. And because there's no one commissioning work, there's always a lot of freedom to sort of explore and experiment.
Yeah.
And then you find yourself 2-3 years later on, like having done a body of work that just propels you towards the next 4 or 5 years. Because when you look back, like when you look back rather, and people go back and they look at your work, you're creating foundation and you're creating layer, and you know. So the idea of always being an active poet, but also being interested in the work of others, being interested in collaborating with others, being interested in creating a community where those that are coming after you don't experience the same problems as you when you were coming up. I think for me, that has always worked, because by the time I started in Joburg, there were a lot of people we were idolizing, but they would treat you like a lightie, you know? It's like, yeah, cool, nice show, and then that's it, you know?
Oh,
and for
yes,
me,
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Horrible people. But it's the idea of we need each other more than just here in the audience. And if I can bring anyone along on this journey with me, 10, 20 years from now, that is my network, and that's how we start living off each other and feeding each other, right? So I've been blessed enough to also be in a network of friends that even if I wanted to leave poetry, they would always call and say, I have a gig for you, or I have this for you to do, I have that. So always keeping you active as well, but having a sense of curiosity with this thing and treating it like it's just as important as when you started, you know? And obviously you fall out of love with it here and there, but when you come back, like, I think if it's genuine, the passion always remains.
Yeah.
So, I mean, when you say 25 years, it's actually a little scary, because I'm like, there's nothing I've done more than this actual thing. I've tried my hands at sport. I tried to play rugby. I tried to do like, like a million other things. I studied marketing. I think I had a marketing job for about 3 months, and I was like, nah, guys, I'm going to go hang out in Newtown where the artists are, you know? So like just the serious passion that doesn't need to be stoked by anything else except what is inside me and what I'm trying to do with this thing. So yeah, I think that's really what's kept me here, and just the beautiful community of people where my friends are the actual people that are doing the same things as me. So even if I wanted to escape this thing, I would always be drawn right back into it, because that's also who I've made my community and my sort of extended family here in Joburg, and really around the continent in general, really, you know? Yeah.
I can so relate, like, on so many levels with what you're saying. And just when you're touching on, you'd rather just go hang out in Newtown.
Yeah.
Actually, you're taking me back. I wanted to go to study at Wits.
Right.
Just because of the poetry.
Right.
Right. Like, my chosen career path was going to be totally different, right? Finance. But I was like, I'm going to Wits because the poets are there. You guys are there.
Right.
What do you miss most about the old poetry scene? Because you have seen, I'm sure, like, so many stages of the scene,
Yeah.
But what do you miss about that stage, the one that you grew up in?
I think there was this beautiful sense of, as much as the older poets weren't necessarily trying to mentor people, there was this beautiful sense of community where we would all go, like, on any day, where to go to hang out, and you could hang out with a drummer, a guitarist, a theater maker, and this is generally Newtown for about 10 years or so. That's was the cultural hub of Johannesburg. So where you could go with absolutely no money in your pocket, no idea, and if I go to Horror Cafe or Shivava or right outside the Market Theatre even and hang out there, I'm going to run into a couple of artists and we're probably going to start talking, and I'm going to figure out about a gallery opening there or this. So just keeping yourself active in that way, right? I think now that I'm older, my biggest, I guess, lament is the fact that those spaces don't exist anymore. And the idea that everything that we are doing is becoming so sort of exclusive and elitist. You'd have to travel elsewhere to go and do it, right? Versus Nikki's Oasis is right around the corner from the Market Theatre Lab, right around the corner from Shivava, right around the corner from Songwriters Club, the Ritual Store, which used to be under the bridge. So just that sense of community that the infrastructure itself sort of fostered, is something that I definitely miss. But there's also a sense of if we didn't move beyond this, then we would never get to what the next version of this poetry landscape would look like. So it's making peace with the idea that things change, and then as you get older, you're like, whoa, don't change too fast. Hang on, wait for me. Let me catch up. But I mean, in the last 5 years or so, the poetry scene in particular has changed. Young poets are coming up, like writing amazing stuff, doing theater work. Kabiso, for me, was a brilliant example of what you can do with poetry with the augmented reality. Tutugani Ndlovu, who was based in the Free State, was actually the first poet to use augmented reality in his poetry collection. So you would, run your phone over it and the work would come alive and there would be audio, which is beautiful, right? And that doesn't necessarily, look like the community that I come from. But I also understand that the community has moved online and they're exploiting ways to use the online space to sort of use or propel poetry forward. But I miss being able to hang out with poets, seeing some guy walk around with a guitar for months and you're like, yo, brah, slam me a tune there. And it's like, oh, no, I can't play. It's just for the look here.
No.
I promise you.
Wow, okay.
I promise you. But it was that type of thing where everyone just wanted to be, where we saw value in the arts and we also saw value in each other's work, and we would go out and support each other, I think that still probably still exists, but because I don't necessarily operate in those spaces anymore, I'm very nostalgic and I'm always reflecting back towards that. But I'm seeing people like Masai Sepuru, Soli, I'm seeing people like Melissa Moyo, all of them sort of coming together, supporting each other when they're doing shows. They're always out at the theaters, always out at the whatever each one is doing, you'll see pictures of them online. So I think in some way, amongst poets that are probably about 10, 15 years younger than me, that is still happening. It's just I might not be plugged into it, and it might not be necessarily be informed by the architecture, which was Newtown, which was actual buildings where you can go and do the art and experience it. Now it's a different space where they're meeting elsewhere, but the work is still continuing and there's still a sense of community as well. So, but yeah, I miss that. I miss that a lot. I miss Louis from Horror Cafe. I miss hanging out at Khramadula's, like not having anything to do on like a Tuesday night. And then there's like a gallery opening and some guy playing an upright bass by the fountain. And like that type of scene in Joburg doesn't exist anymore. But also, it just makes you realize that you're on the other side of the evolution, like. So
touching on the community, we are often referred to as a poetry community and not the poetry industry.
Right.
Why do you think that is, and what will it take for us to have an established poetry industry?
I'm always worried about the word industry because industry sort of negates the idea of community, right? But community doesn't break away from or doesn't negate the idea of industry. If we invest in each other, then that means we'll look after each other, and that's what a community does, versus industry that is profit-driven. An industry that is product-driven and outcomes-driven. And I think sometimes the work of an artistic community isn't necessarily the outputs, but us maintaining each other, keeping each other sane, because we need to then take the work we are doing and present it to the world to try and fix the world, right? But what I think we need to do is, one, create our own thing. So infrastructure, where do we do what we do? intellectual property? Do we own what we are doing? The spaces that we are plugging into, do we understand the value of the contributions we are making? We're not being exploited by what we assume is an entity that wields more power. It's understanding that no, for a festival to happen, you need poets, which means the power lays with the poets, not the person organizing the festival or curating the festival. And it's sort of understanding those dynamics. But most importantly, also, it's like when me and you are discussing fees, to be honest with each other, to say, when we go in here, we're charging them 70 Rand, right? And then you don't go in and then undercut me and say, I'm charging you 30 so that I can get that. And I think that's a conversation we've been having for such a long time. That it obviously seems like that is the way we can go forward in terms of establishing a base for how we want to be treated financially and how we also want to be compensated for the work that we are doing. But it is important to start with people that are interested in each other first. That way I'm going to come back and want to buy your book, and that then translates into industry. So I'm very much interested in the idea of connecting souls versus connecting people that are creating or churning out things. There's a big difference between the two. It's like if you two can just hang out and just write nice poems, that's fine. Or just enjoy each other's company, that's fine. Versus I want you two to sit down, come up with a concept, and let's go write a play, sell tickets, do a marketing plan. And then I think those things happen better once there's an understanding between people, but also community work takes longer. It asks you to be patient with each other. It asks you to understand each other. It asks you to sometimes be in spaces with people that you don't like and then work through those things. Industry doesn't want that. It just says, send the invoice, pay me, and then that's the end of it. So it's about finding that balance. And I think it's also about where you personally want to go with the work that we are creating, because it's important for us to eat, but I think it's also more important for us to be in good standing with those that do the same things as us.
What are your thoughts on gatekeeping in this space? Are you a gatekeeper?
I think I am. I really think I am by default,
because people have come out and blasted people for gatekeeping. Well, sometimes, they kind of hide their names, but you know who they're talking about.
Right. I think by default, anyone that does shows, anyone that curates, anyone that works with programs, anyone that has a budget that says, can I sort of put a show together on some level, because your reach only extends as far as one, your personal likes, but also what you know. So on some level, you are a gatekeeper, right? But for me, my ethos is when I'm doing shows, I'm always looking for people that have never done this before, that others haven't heard, So I think that sort of, hopefully it stops me from being that person. But I think anyone that has the responsibility to curate and create platforms on some level need to understand that their reach ends. And if they don't accept that their reach ends, that immediately turns you into a gatekeeper, because you assume that you are the be-all and know-all of it all. But yeah, what are my thoughts on it? I think it's silly. One, I think the idea of saying I'm not gonna create space for someone because for whatever reason is just doesn't make sense to me. And also, it's like so much time wasted on just being negative and trying to negatively impact someone else's life or their artistic output. For me, it's just like, it's strange why you would want to spend your time doing something like that. But I also understand that sometimes people talk about, you gatekeeping and whatever else. And you're like, okay, let me read the poems. And I'm like, but the poems don't qualify to be here. Whether I was here or someone else, the performance doesn't qualify to be here, whether I was the one doing the show or someone else. So maybe I'm not gatekeeping. Maybe it's just you needing to work on getting to that level where I can say I'm willing to pay you to come and do the show, right? But I also think it's like, it's some boogeyman story, really. Like the idea of people meeting to stop others from. It's like, no. It's sometimes I don't know who you are, and until you come in my sort of scope, I never would know, and you could always perceive that as, but you are gatekeeping. You are keeping me outside, And it's when we create art, it's a very personal thing. And to have your art rejected is almost like having yourself rejected, right? So those conversations go from gatekeeping to sort of internalizing it, and then that turns into my attitude towards you, and then that whole time none of you have had a conversation. There was no introduction. There was no, And in the same breath, I also know that there's people that know who they want to work with, and they make absolutely no secret of it. Like, these are my people, and these are the ones I'm going to be pushing, And whether you consider that gatekeeping or not, I don't know. But I think we need to find what works for us. And if there are people that say they don't want to be with us, it's fine, then move on. You know, if there are people that are generally saying, look at me, you haven't looked at me. I think as someone who's in a space that sort of curates and creates platforms, it is important for you to always say, hold up, let me look in this direction. Everyone that I know, give me a chance to sort of interrogate what's happening over here that you might not be familiar with, so that I can bring you in as well. Which is why I enjoy that type of work, because it asks you to go out and find new voices, right? I work as the editor of Poetry Potion. Sometimes we publish poets that have won like amazing awards. And then other times it's like someone down the road from like Promosa and Potchefstroom, a 13-year-old girl that wrote her first poem. And for me, that's the idea of opening platforms, right? And then creating space for absolutely everyone.
Nice.
But keeping in mind that there is levels of quality also that you need to entertain and keep in mind.
So you speak of having curated shows, and recently you did the 2022 Joburg leg of Poetry Africa.
Yeah.
How was that? Firstly, let's start there. How was it?
It was amazing. It was tiring, but it was beautiful to see the entire Johannesburg community come out and just support poetry and like such a vibe and beautiful faces that you haven't seen over the years. It was lovely to see, especially after 2 years of COVID and not having those type of events. We've had a lot of smaller events, but that one in particular, those 3 days for me was just tiring, but also like so rewarding, because it's the work that we live to do. You know? Yeah.
Why now in 20? I mean, we all know how long Poetry Africa has been around for. When did you get involved, and why did you all of a sudden having the Joburg leg in 2022?
So I've been going to Poetry Africa for like the last 15 years, and I've always sort of just going on my own, exploring the poetry, and then with the university sometimes they would give me a budget to take some of the students with.
Oh, nice.
And then over the years, we sort of became part of the Fringe program, where we would go and do, outreach programs that asked the UJ students to show up at shows and those type of things, just on the sort of outskirts. So we've always had this very loose relationship with Poetry Africa and the festival, the UJ Poetry group in particular, or class. And then last year, I think in response to COVID as well, or in response to sort of the void that COVID left, we had this really cool meeting with Dr. Ismail Mohammed, myself, and my line manager at UJ. I was like, we've been going there the whole time. Why don't we collaborate in some way and see if we can maybe make this official? And thank God, because also at the university, they sort of trusted me with this, and they were like, okay, let's see how we can actually add value and make sure that this isn't just the sort of ad hoc thing that happens in the moment, but something that we can build on. And that started from a conversation sometime last year. And I guess it was about a whole year of sort of planning and curatorial work to sort of get it to that point. But it was literally just exploiting the network, exploiting the relationships, and saying, we've been here, you've seen what we're capable of doing. How can we plug in? How do you want to plug in? How can we exchange and make this thing work? And hopefully this was just the first, and we can really sort of take it forward into the future and have a Joburg leg of the actual festival, which proven by the audience is what the community wants here.
Listen, it was 3 days of absolute amazingness. There is no proper English word for it, but it was absolutely worth it. And you all need to make me like the roaming presenter. Flo Wellington even said it, but I don't think Ismail unja serious. But like really, guys, like I'd love to do that. And Flo Wellington, thank you ever so much for like planting that seed, because it would be so awesome.
Can I just say this though? You did an amazing job, because that's also what I love about work that isn't commissioned by anyone else, just when the passion says, let me go and do this, right? But everyone was like, Emmah has to interview me. I'm like, what is going on with everyone being interviewed by? I love that, because that is how that work starts existing in different spaces, and whoever you're going to be presenting it to. So I love that, and I'm definitely going to pitch it. Like, we need a roving presenter who's already done some work, you know? But yeah, it's beautiful to capture that spirit of the festival as well. So it's one thing to sit in the audience and watch the performances, but it's another to then sit back and reflect on people's reflections when you ask them, how was this? How did you feel about that? And half the time, as the curator, as an organizer, you don't get that moment. So I really appreciate the fact that you dove into everyone's sort of psyche and like figured out what their rationale was around those 3 days. And it's also just beautiful to sort of sit back and be helped to reflect by someone else, where you don't have to do all the thinking, after all of the chaos of sort of organizing and doing that. But I'm definitely going to mention it.
No, but well done.
Yeah.
That Joburg leg is to be remembered.
Yeah.
Now, I'd like you to please field some audience questions.
Okay.
First one from Shane Rinswin.
Uh,
I know him as No Life.
No Life.
Hey, your
Yeah.
social media names people. All right. Do you think Terry Pratchett liked mustard jerseys?
I think Terry Pratchett liked every type of jersey, and especially jerseys with mustard stains on them. So yeah.
Okay. MCing or poetry? Which profession has better writers?
I think two feed off each other, you know. Poetry teaches the poet how to use words and put words in a beautiful order, and hip hop and MCing teaches you the musicality of it. So you can't say which is which. The one sort of informs the other. But obviously poets, because they just spend more time writing, and rappers get away with saying nothing, you know, at the risk of offending a lot of them. But it's sometimes just like lazy, whereas poetry asks you to hear the line, and then there's like 6-7 different meanings that you can interrogate from that. So yeah, I think poetry always exploits and interrogates the ideas beyond what it sounds like or beyond the words. So poets definitely have better writers, but I think the two inform each other.
Which poets do you wish had never left the game and were still writing or performing?
Some of my favorite poets, Nomkubulwane. She used to write in Xhosa, and that's the thing I didn't understand about her energy. Every time she was in the show, I'm like, this is going to be an amazing show. Prophet JD was from the early 2000s. Nonku, Chiwe, oh my God, Keti. There's so many poets, you know, and yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, there's a lot of poets really like that, sort of from those early Horror Cafe days, Cool Runnings days in Joburg, that I really wish, because they sort of influenced me as well. Kabelo Mufokeng, who's an amazing photographer. I haven't read any of his work recently. I'm not sure if he still writes work. Mutufela, known as Common Man, who was an amazing poet as well. There's quite a few.
There's a few.
Yeah.
Favorite poet or writer? One local, one international.
Oh, I hate this question.
And you don't have to explain why.
Favorite poet locally, currently?
Currently old?
Julie Ngadi from the Eastern Cape. I don't know what she's doing, but she's doing it. And like, you know, when someone writes something and you're jealous, you're like, I wish I wrote that. But I don't even know how you wrote it. So I don't. Julie Ngadi for me is one of those people. I really thoroughly enjoy her work. Internationally, Paul Gausk from the Catalan. I met him at Poetry Africa. He was one of the people we brought, and I read some of his work and I really loved it. And when he performed it, it was like, oh my God, this guy is amazing. So Paul for me is definitely one of the people whose work since the festival I've been going back to and reading as well.
Nice.
Yeah.
Of the upcoming poets, who should we be on the lookout for?
Melissa Moyo, Patience Labane, Olaf Olesegun, Masai Sepuru, Soli Ramatsui. I don't know if upcoming Belita is upcoming, but Belita is also one of my favorite poets. Belita is not really upcoming. All of them. Horsey, who sent a question, you know, Lord Strider, he's doing amazing work with sort of merging African spirituality, African movement, dance with what he does on stage. That's really interesting work. Jonathan Lafenya. There's many, man. Don't do this to me.
It's okay. Looking at your entire journey, what is it that you wish you knew or were told when you started?
That I need to look after my relationships. Because now that I'm older, I kind of understand that that's the value of, that's the currency, the relationships that we have in this space. Because I'm calling Emmah because Emmah knows me. Emmah calls me because Emmah, you know, vice versa. And I think if just being aware of the fact that people have value beyond how they are perceived in artistic spaces, and their artistic output doesn't necessarily equate their value, you know. And those are decisions, those are sort of mistakes I made very early on, like thinking this person is not important for my journey and then leaving them there. And then later on becoming really good friends with those people and realizing they weren't important for that part of the journey, but to have them in my life, So just the value of relationships and being able to understand that the value doesn't play out immediately. Sometimes you yourself have to invest into the relationship for it to reap reward sometimes.
Nice.
And this is something I'm learning much later on now as well. Yeah.
So much wisdom. Is there anything you would add or take away from the current poetry scene?
I would tell poets to just read more. I love poetry, but when I ask poets what inspire you, I hate that they give me YouTube references instead of book titles. And young poets are writing beautiful work. Letubuhle Msimang, I've been reading Hubris, and same story. When I read her work, I'm like, I'm gonna need to tell this person to stop because I need to catch up to what she's doing, right? And for me, there's a joy in that as well. Just understanding that the basis of all the work is writing. And we don't write for our audience. There's no one standing over us clapping when we write and we put that comma there. It's a very personal thing. But also, so is reading and consuming the tools, consuming the tools to then be able to write. So I'd love for poets to just be able to reference a bit more literature as opposed to a performance or a slam or a video, because I think there's some worth there. And it also just ensures longevity, like the idea that you're able to back up what you are doing with what you have read and how you sort of critically think around text and poetry and how it plays on the page. So that's something that I would love to see for younger people to also publish a little more. Publish your own books, do chapbooks, send to publications, send it to journals. Just make sure that your work exists beyond the physical space you are in. Let the rest of the world read your works, and the only way they can do it is if you send it to them into spaces where it can be published. So I'd love to see a little more interaction with text and books as opposed to just this, performance idea of what poetry is.
Nice.
Yeah.
You have done a lot, you have achieved a lot. What is your ultimate dream or goal with poetry?
I think I want, if my son tells me tomorrow, I want to be a poet, that fear that I have, I don't want it to be there. So for me, it's whatever work I need to do to be able to tell him, go and do it. Because me and the community that came before you set in place things for you to go and flourish. I think that's it. And whatever that means, being it the teaching work I do at the university, being it like mentoring, editing people's work, or just having a conversation and also realizing that that's sometimes all people want. It might not be put me on a show or do this or that and that. It's like sometimes just allowing yourself also to be available for people to use you as a sounding board. And so, like I said, whatever I need to do or me and my community need to do for us to tell our children, then go ahead and do it because we've set you up properly for this to be good forever. And whatever that means. So, and starting small, whatever small little thing needs to be done. You can't change the whole world all at once, but the revolution starts with you picking up the paper and throwing it in the bin. And 10 people seeing you, and then 10 people doing that today and tomorrow. And in however long we stuck with a place that's clean, and we're literally all standing around asking, how did it happen, without us training each other or forcing each other to get there. So, yeah.
Quaz, thank you for availing yourself today. Thank you for availing of yourself to the entire community. I have enjoyed today. I finally got to sit down with you. So thank you ever so much.
Thank you.
Thank you also to the South African State Theatre for the space. Thank you for giving us the ability to hear such wonderful artists, to, just voice ideas, opinions, journeys, This is really edutainment, I think, at its finest. So thank you ever so much as well for tuning into today's episode of Puo.